You're listening to the No Schedule Man podcast with Kevin Bulmer, exploring real stories and lessons learned with a variety of special guests. To learn more about Kevin and to access other episodes of the podcast, please visit noscheduleman.com and connect and contribute at No Schedule Man on Twitter or Instagram and on Facebook, YouTube, and SoundCloud, all /No Schedule Man. Thanks for listening and enjoy the No Schedule Man podcast.
I've been known to struggle with reality, not that it is any real mystery.
Hi, I'm Kevin Bulmer. Welcome to the show. I hope you're having a terrific day, and thank you for taking me along for part of it. At the time that I'm recording this, we're in that window right smack in between Christmas and New Year's. So just getting ready to click the calendar over into 2017. And one of the things I love about podcasts so much is that once you put the episode up, you could be listening to it at any time. So maybe you're hearing this far into the future, and Christmas and New Year's is the last thing that's on your mind. But just for context in terms of when I'm recording this, we're sort of into that cycle of the year where it seems to be natural to just reflect back on where you've been over the last calendar year and maybe what are some of the things that you want to attend to, call them resolutions if you like, goals, any of those kinds of things, going toward and in through the next calendar year. I'm not all that big a New Year's guy, I confess, so I think that this material works for whenever you're listening, because the idea that I get it. Like when you click over to a new calendar year and the number actually changes, I see where some people think that's a big deal. Many people feel the same way about their birthday, but on your last day of being one age and then on your first day of being the next age, all that's really changing is that number. You're still only 24 hours away from yourself, if you know what I mean. So I guess the greater point is that if you have a change that you're thinking that you want to make, an action that you feel like you need to take, a habit that you want to change, a light has gone on that you think you need to follow, why wait until January 1st? Why wait until any time? If it feels like the time is right, then the time is right now. But having said that, we'll go back to when you get in that little pocket, the Christmas rush is finally done, and you're getting ready to click the calendar over into a new year. I think it's natural to just kind of look back and think, wow, okay, how'd that last year go? What was good about it? What are some of the things that I would like to improve? What do I want to accomplish going forward? Now, maybe people don't do that. If you don't do that, I'm not exactly sure why you're listening to a podcast like this, because this is what we do. It's a journey. It's about evolving and engaging in each step and then releasing some old ideas and then repeating that whole process as we continue along this journey and share and try to learn from each other. At least that's what I'm here for, and that's what I hope that you'll take part in as well. So I've been looking back at 2016, and in particular in the podcast, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in this particular episode and what I've learned from it. And the reason why I'm doing that is that I'm hoping that you'll be able to take some of this away and apply it to your own journey. And specifically, if there's something that you've been thinking that you might want to do, but you're not quite sure if you should get started or how you should get started, or even more to the point, you're concerned that you might not have it all thought out. Because this was a huge stumbling block for me. It continues to be, quite frankly, for a lot of things I do. One of the things that has been just an enormous gateway to freedom, at least in terms of expressing creativity this year, is embracing the idea of just jumping into the pool and allowing yourself to not be a very strong swimmer. Now, if you're going to jump into the pool, you want to know how to swim well enough to keep your head above water, all right? But you don't have to be an Olympic-level swimmer to jump into the pool and enjoy it. The more you're in it, the stronger that you'll get at maneuvering around inside it. And I guess that's the message, is just get going. Get started. Don't worry about being perfect. Don't worry about having all the answers, because you're not going to have them all. It's going to evolve. That's part of the fun. And I didn't get that for most of the first part of my life. There's so much that I never even tried to do, or so much anxiety that I brought upon myself for the things that I did do, because I was judging it far more harshly than anybody else was. And then the people that were judging it harshly and were just being ignorant to me about it, well, who cares about them anyway? I'll tell you who I did. I cared way too much about that sort of stuff for a long, long time. And I can see that going forward, as this continues to expand and as I grow into some of the efforts that I'm looking to pursue, that you're going to start taking more arrows, more toxic verbal arrows from people. But that's part of the deal, and why you want to feel resolved that you are following your purpose and your heart. So I'm meandering around all over the place. As far as the podcast, a little bit of context on it. So my background, at least in terms of career, is in traditional, or what they would refer to in the business as terrestrial radio. In other words, not satellite or internet radio or something like that, just regular old over-the-air radio. That's what I went to school for. It's the first industry that I broke into, and that was my original career aspiration. And I did that. I got into the business and lived that sort of archetypal role of doing everything inside the radio station until I eventually found myself on air doing the afternoon show, and then moving my way up to hosting the morning show at the station that I was working for. And it only took me, I think, 5 years, 4.5, 5 years from the time that I left school to be hosting the morning show at that radio station. But what happened was I wasn't happy. I got what I thought I wanted, and I wasn't happy when I got there. And there were a whole bunch of reasons for that, but I ended up switching careers and getting into sales and marketing and eventually business management, and I still was doing some announcing and things like that. I eventually kind of came back in and out of broadcasting a couple of different times, both on the air and on the marketing and the promotional side. But suffice it to say is that some sort of expression in this mode, talking, has always been part of who I am, and something that I've enjoyed and that I've done. But I didn't want to get back into terrestrial radio. I wanted to do something that really fed more my spirit and my soul, something that I felt passionate about, something that I knew that was going to be hard work, but that I wouldn't mind doing the work because I would be feeling like I was really contributing something worthwhile to anybody who cared to listen, and frankly, to myself. And that's what this podcast has become. When I listen back to some of the first, this will be the 29th episode. So when I listen back to bits and pieces of the first 28, I giggle a little bit because I think I'm just creating my own personal development and self-improvement course. That wasn't the intention, but if you listen back to the lessons that are given, and they aren't formed in terms of lessons, they're just people sharing their journey and what they've learned and what they've experienced and the challenges that they've faced and how they've overcome them. It's an incredible resource in personal development. But for me, it's been so much more than that, and it came really close to never happening. So back to where I was a couple of moments ago. My background was in radio. I had thought for years that I might like to do something like this. So I remember years ago, I started listening to Radio Margaritaville. I like Jimmy Buffett a lot, and I love how he was kind of cutting edge, where he had his own internet radio station years before other people were doing that, and was broadcasting his concerts. And there are all kinds of artists that I learned about through Radio Margaritaville that I probably never would have heard of otherwise, guys like Will Kimbrough and Sonny Landreth and people like that. And I liked that idea. I thought, well, maybe I can do like no schedule man radio and play the artists that I like and maybe play some of my own songs and interject and do some bits. And I let that rattle around in my head for, well, probably a few years. And then as time went on, I got really interested in listening to podcasts. There are several that I listen to every week. Some come out every day that I try to catch up with as much as I can. And I started thinking, and this was years ago, man, I'd like to do that. But how do you do that? And, you know, at the time, working mostly full-time as a marketing consultant in the broadcasting industry, and, you know, marketing guys, sales guys, they don't do radio show. They don't do podcasts. How are you ever going to do that? And I listened to that voice, and I let it hold me up for at least a couple of years. But the feeling just kept coming back up. And each year when I'd get to the end of the year and I would sort of reassess what I was doing and where I was going, I'd go over notes that I'd made of the previous year, and I'd keep seeing that podcast or internet radio or online radio or something like that. And so it was around this time last year, so around Christmas and New Year's, going into the end of 2015, that I was in that headspace again. And I would have been a few years into the process of something I described in great detail a couple of episodes ago when I talk about 5 books that changed my life. And I mentioned the book 5 Wishes by Gay Hendricks, and how the fundamental question that it asks and challenges you to consider is, if your life were to end right now and you look back on your life, was it a success or was it not? And if not, why not? And what are the things that you wish you had put more time and effort into, or things that you didn't do but you wish that you had? So start there and start working on those things so that when you do come to the end of your road, you'll be able to look back and go, my life was a success because at least you tried with those things. So I had that in mind when I got to the end of 2015, about a year from the time that I'm recording this podcast. And I thought, you know what, this little podcast thing, it keeps showing up on the list. Why don't I try it? And so I resolved at that time to do 1 episode just to see if I could do it. And so I asked my buddy Derek Rock Botten to sit down with me. We went out and we had breakfast in January of 2016, and we kibitzed a little bit here and there. And then my idea was that he and I would sit down and have a conversation, sharing stories and remembrances of the time that he and I worked as announcers at a stock car racing track called Delaware Speedway, which is actually a place that I later became the sales and marketing director, and then later general manager, and then later was brought back through another company I was a part of to do some consulting work for them. And I have a lot of great and not so great memories of that place. A lot of the great memories have been buried by some of the not so great memories. And that has been an interesting byproduct of doing the podcast, as well as accidentally accessing a lot of the great memories. Anyway, the time that Derek and I were working together was great. And so that was the premise, that he and I would just sort of sit down and tell stories, to just create 1 episode of 1 podcast. And I decided I'd call it the No Schedule Man podcast, because No Schedule Man has really been the brand of so much that I've done, and it's even evolved through the course of the year. So I set up with my digital recorder 2 mics at my kitchen table, and Derek and I sat down in January of 2016 and had that chat. And I remember it feeling fun but awkward, because I didn't really have a specific goal or focus for the show. So I wasn't really trying to steer it anywhere. I remember getting about 2/3 of the way through the conversation and not really feeling sure whether we should wrap it up or, or what we should do. But I listened back to it after the fact and immediately had this very physical, emotional response to it, where I thought, yeah, okay, we're on to something now. I love how that sounds. There was an energy between me and Derek that I think was apparent to other people that listened to it. I said, you know what, that sounds like 2 guys sitting down, sharing stories, and that there's a good energy to it. And when I did that 1 episode, I was hooked. I knew I needed to do another. But so here's what I think is kind of funny. My original goal when I started the podcast was to do 1 a month. You know, part of the many excuses, or one of the many excuses that I had in not even starting, was that I was really concerned about where I would find the time to do a podcast. So I thought, well, 1 a month, we'll try and do that. That's not a great way to build an audience. But from talking to Derek and then getting that out, and then we heard from some people that knew me and knew Derek from our time at the racetrack, and that was really nice, and it actually reconnected me with some people that I'd not talked to in a long time, and so that was nice also. And then I got into the mindset of who would make an interesting guest, who would I like to speak to? And so I started writing down names of people, many of whom have since been on the podcast. One of them was Mike Mulligan, and Mike was the featured guest in the 2nd episode. And Mike is somebody that I came to know through my work as a marketing consultant in the broadcasting industry, and you can hear his story in episode 2. For that one, we recorded it remotely. I went to Mike's business, set the microphones and the digital recorder up there, and just really got into asking him about his journey, that was electric jolt number 2. Because with that one, I realized that having the conversation forced me into a kind of presence, in that case with Mike Mulligan, that is something that we don't experience a whole lot of in our day-to-day lives. I talk to a lot of people every single day, but it's often in really short bits and pieces. And usually with a purpose of either trying to extract some information or broadcast some information, like this giant game of hot potato that we're playing. But we're not really being with each other. And when I sat and really listened to Mike's story, everything else fell away. It was just this feeling of complete presence and gratitude for having that time with him and getting to know him better. And I remember also being amazed at how open he was with sharing some really intimate details of some things that had been very traumatic for him. And he shared some things that I don't even think even some of his own family members have heard him talk about. And I remember him calling me. I was actually at the airport in Toronto, getting ready to go on a vacation, and he called me while I was sitting and waiting for the plane in that airport and told me that he'd had phone calls from his family members that were in tears, that were so proud of him for sharing his story, and that others that were calling him saying that they didn't even realize some of what he'd shared. And I felt tremendously honored by that. And I think at that point, I knew I was onto something, not necessarily that was going to create this massive audience, but something that could make a difference for the people that I was talking to and their immediate circle. And selfishly for me, that I knew that I was going to be able to grow a deeper connection with these people. I was going to learn a lot, and that I may be able to help. I might be able to be the conduit between, getting these people to share their stories, their journeys, so that you might be able to benefit by feeling more included, by feeling less alone, by feeling more empowered, by understanding that everybody has their challenges, by discovering how they overcome them. And what's funny, though, while I'm listening to myself say that, is that even back at that point, I still didn't really know what the podcast was about. I'm offering this perspective through the benefit of the hindsight of having worked at it for the better part of a year. So at this point, I'm still thinking back when I did the second episode with Mike Mulligan, I was still thinking, well, maybe I can do a couple episodes a month. No, I guess I was still thinking maybe one episode a month. But then I called my friend Rose Cora Perry. I thought it'd be fun to talk creativity and a little bit of music, and she sat down with me. And then Chad Price. So Chad and I didn't even really know each other all that well, but have since become great friends. And the connection that we made through that podcast, that I very quickly realized how much I enjoyed it. I thought, well, maybe every other week. Maybe I could do this every other week, and I could stagger it so that it comes out on Tuesdays for the most part, but that would come out on the Tuesday after the weekend that my boys are with their mother. So I was divorced in 2011, and so I've got my 2 kids with me about half the time, and that time is off limits to everything else. I've talked about that before. So every other weekend, my boys are with their mom. Now, I still see them lots, especially when Jaden is playing hockey, make sure that I go and see all those games and most of the practices and things like that. But I've got a little bit more time to play with, although not as much as you would think. But a little bit more time to play with on those weekends to record the introduction, record the wrap-up, do the editing, get it all uploaded, write the blog post, all that kind of stuff that needs to go with it. I thought I might be able to handle that. So I started in on that idea, and that took me up to the end of May. And then I remember having the conversation with David Cicerelli, who's the CEO of Voices.com. And that was episode 10. It wasn't during the conversation, it was afterwards when I listened back to it that I really clearly and specifically remember thinking, oh, this podcast is about personal development. I get it now. I don't know why it was that episode, but I actually, if you go to my Facebook page, if you go to facebook.com/noscheduleman, if you scroll back far enough, there is maybe this is on my personal page. I might be leading you astray here. Anyway, I remember posting, at some point, I'm going to look back on this episode as the one where this podcast found its legs. And I still feel that way. I enjoyed every single conversation prior to that, but there was something about that chat with David Cicerelli that I sort of felt like, okay, I had 9 of these under my belt. I had some confidence. Now I was going into his office. I had to arrange that through his assistants. I wanted to be on my game. I wanted to ask him questions that would lead to impactful answers. I wanted to extract some key things from his journey. And he shared some incredible insights. And I remember listening back to that and thinking, okay, we're onto something here. This is about personal development. This is about getting people to share about their journey. How did you do what you do? Why do you feel passionate about the things that you're doing? What are some of the challenges that you've run into? How did you overcome them? How did you do it? He shared that. And then things really started to pick up steam for me. So some of the other episodes that were kind of aha moments. Episodes 11 and 12, so right on the heels of the David Cicerelli podcast episode, kind of epiphany, when I got Kevin O'Hara of alcoholmastery.com and Jason Stevenson of meditationmasters.tv to join me on the podcast. That blew my mind open to think I can do more with this than I originally thought I was going to be able to. Kevin O'Hara was the one, he was the first guest that I recorded over Skype, and I remember having to really jump through some hoops trying to figure out how I was going to do that. Now I don't even think about it. But at that point, there was a lot of trial and error involved. Kevin and Jason are both people that I hold in great esteem, really looked up to, and I continue to, although I now consider both of them friends. Prior to reaching out to them, I really looked up to them and kind of held them as separate from me, bigger than me, maybe even better than me. And when they agreed to join, they didn't ask me, how many subscribers do you have? They didn't even ask me, what does no schedule man mean? They just both said, I'd love to. And we're incredibly generous with their time and both shared just fantastic stories. Kevin, I'm anxious to do another podcast with Kevin so that there can be less of me in it because I was so excited to talk to him. There's far too much of me talking inside that episode. It drives me crazy when I listen back to it. What you get to hear is somebody just so genuinely excited to talk to somebody that has made such a positive difference in their lives, and you get to listen in on it. I did slightly better with Jason, although I did interject a little bit. But the story that he shares, absolutely remarkable. If you look at him now with hundreds of thousands of subscribers on YouTube, and people love him all over the world for the work that he does with his meditation and his music. So when you get to look at him from where he is now, without considering what he's been through, what he shares in that episode 12, is what he went through and what his life looked like before he finally turned and got started on the path that he's on now. I was absolutely fascinated that he did that. In episode 14 with Sarah Westbrook, I remember sitting and having the conversation with her and having a feeling like I was getting hit by a lightning bolt while we were sitting with each other during the conversation. And it said, get going on your speaking. Now's the time. Let's go. It came to me clear as day while I was sitting and talking to Sarah. And her podcast, if I could only pull one episode out of all of the ones that I've done so far, hers would definitely be in the top of that group. What she had to share about owning your choices and working your mental and emotional muscles. I think everybody should have to hear that, especially young people. Another aha moment came in episode 18 after talking with Bruce Van Horn, where he talked about life as a marathon, and I loved that conversation as well. The epiphany with that one came actually after the episode was over, and I was talking to Bruce. We were kibitzing back and forth after we'd recorded the interview. And he was talking about his podcast, which is called Life is a Marathon, which I highly encourage you to go and try out. And in listening to Bruce, that was the first time that I remember thinking, maybe I can do one of these every week. And I was scared about that. I thought, wow, you're really you're really going to be challenging yourself where you really only have early mornings and evenings and every other weekend and only some evenings to try to work on that. But that was when I really made an effort to think, I'm going to try and get one of these out every week. Bruce rarely has guests on his podcast. I remember him telling me, mine's not like yours. Mine is me speaking. And I hadn't thought about doing something like that, like I'm doing right now. But part of what I had in mind when I started this was that over time, I wanted to build a little bit of a relationship with you, realizing that just like anybody else, I'm not for everybody. You might have tuned into this and I can't listen to that guy and turned it right off. You're just, you're going to get some of that. But some people you will resonate with. And maybe mine can be a voice that you find comfort in. Mine can be an approach that you like to collaborate with, which is certainly what I'm aiming for and hoping for. But it wasn't until after I talked to Bruce that I thought, maybe I could do this every week. And if I have to, I could do some episodes that's just me, so that I don't step all over somebody like I did to Kevin O'Hara in bits and pieces where I had things to say, where I wanted to interject. And certainly there is some give and take in the episodes that feature a different guest. And I tell them from the outset, this is not meant to be a traditional interview. This is supposed to be a conversation. But having said that, I'm more interested in your story than I am in mine because I already know my story. That's what I tell pretty much each guest before we have the conversation. But it was around that time, episode 18, at Bruce Van Horn, I thought maybe I can do one of these every week. And ever since then, we've had one out every single week. Another milestone came at episode 22 when I ran across Gare Maxwell. Remember how I said that when I was talking with Sarah Westbrook, I had that lightning bolt that said to me, Kevin, you got to get going on your speaking. It's what you've wanted to do ever since you formed Kevin Bulmer Enterprises over 16 years ago. Get going. So I have been working hard at that. And that's a long story besides. But when I reached out to Gare Maxwell, I didn't know that Gare was in the same city that I'm in. I didn't know that. I looked him up online and I thought, I love what this guy has to say. I love what he's about. I wonder if I could get him on the podcast. And I emailed through his website and he was on the phone to me within about 10 minutes of that email. A lot of people I never hear back from. Some people, I'll email them, especially if it's not a direct email, but it goes through their website. It'll usually take a while before I hear back if I ever do. Gare was on the phone to me. He's still the only person, the only guest that's ever done that, called me back. And Gare has been Tech Canada's Speaker of the Year. He's been in the industry, about 18 years as of the time of this recording. He seemed really interested right off the bat at what I was up to, wanted to get together right away, was all for doing the podcast episode, and you can hear that in episode 22. And he has become one of those people that rockets into your life that just makes you think, okay, when you take action with intention, people are going to be put in your path that you can't conceive of when you first start out. But if you just trust in the process, they're going to be put in front of you. And then there was another kind of an aha moment in the episode that is previous to this, episode 28, with my friend Jim Cressman, who's a retired sports writer and still a professional umpire. And Jim's was one of the names that was on the list when I originally set out of people that I wanted to talk to. But I'm going to be very honest. By the time that I reached out to Jim, I wasn't sure that talking to him fit the mold of the show. I had been actively looking for people like who turned out to be, I'll give you some examples, Gare Maxwell, Michelle Dutro, Kim Von Berg, Sue Kerr, people that were talking about overcoming addiction and personal reinvention and branding and being a game changer and relationships and communication, things like this. And Jim was a sports writer, and I thought, okay, I got to know Jim when I was working out at the racetrack at Delaware Speedway. Are people that listen to this podcast really going to want to listen to stories about that? But he was on that list, and I know Jim, and I love Jim, and it just so happens that, sorry, I just banged into the microphone. It just so happens that I got a note from him out of the blue on something completely unrelated, and I hadn't heard from him in months. And immediately. I didn't think. I just said, hey, you know what? I want to have you on the podcast. When can we get together? And within a week, we were sitting together at his house, and I hadn't seen him in years. I don't know how many years it had been. We had the conversation, and again, it was when I listened back to it. There's something weird about when you're actually having the conversation, you hear it, but you're in it, and you don't really have the perspective of it. It's only after the fact, when I go back and I listen to it separately, that I really sort of get the full scope of what was talked about, and that's where I extract some of the key learnings and things like that. But it was after talking to Jim that I thought, oh, okay. It is the whole embodiment of what I think No Schedule Man is all about, that the journey is the destination. You know, I'd always asked Jim, why hasn't he written a book? You know, we didn't even hardly tell any of the stories that he has, and we'll do another one. He and I have already talked about an idea for this coming summer. But anyway, why not a blog? Why not? Well, we talk about that in that episode 28. And it became so clear with what he was discussing with everything else is that he liked being there. He loved the experience. He liked being around other people. He liked just being on site, that organic experience that you can only have when you're there. Writing, on the other hand, can be a really lonely occupation. If you're just sitting there and you're trying to recall stories and you're working largely alone, it doesn't have to be alone, but it can be. And all of the writing that he did through his years at the newspaper came from the experience of being at the events and in the company of those that were making these things happen. And he was the conduit to bring that out to all the people that would read about it after the fact. But it became clear to me that it was the experience and the experiences, plural, that all added up. That it wasn't about taking all of that and then putting it into some book, like wrapping up all your stories with a tidy little bow on it. There was no period that could be put at the end of that sentence. It was the experiences, that journey. That was it. That's the book. That's the thing that the bow's on. It's the journey, the stories, the experiences. And that's what this podcast has become about. Now, I've got all sorts of other things written down here about reflections of 2016 that I think will just have to, they'll have to go in some into some other episodes or some other blogs or some other video blogs or some of the other things that I was going to talk about. But what I want to leave you with, knowing that at the time that I'm recording this, we're about to put 2016 to a close and about to start into a new year, is it has become absolutely clear to me that it's true that the journey is the destination. And that what No Schedule Man is all about, when he says no plan is all part of the plan, that whole idea is get moving forward, but allow yourself to be blown sideways here and there. And if you're interested at all in reading about the law of attraction and intention and all of these kinds of things, if you can get to know yourself, which is a whole other subject, but if you can start to get to know yourself enough so that you can start to hear that voice inside yourself, call it intuition, God, the universe, whatever, those whispers that resonate with your heart. And for me, I heard those whispers, and it was years before I finally acted upon them. And even now, each time I act, you hear those other negative voices. This won't work. People won't like this, like, and you have to have the persistence and the strength to choose not to carry those with you and to choose to go forward in the manner that your heart is telling you to. The way will show itself to you. It's like throwing the road in front of you as you run. But you're going to meet people. You're going to have experiences. You're going to learn things that you could not possibly have conceived of when you just started out or before that. But if you don't get started, you'll never know. So as I'm heading into a new year and looking to make another quantum leap in the results that I'm hoping to achieve, I look back on the year that we're just now closing, and I am so glad and so grateful that I finally acted on one of those whispers that spoke to my heart. And so what I want to leave you with is the idea is that tomorrow's not promised to us. Right now is all that we have. And acknowledge the past only in so much as that it can serve you. Everything else, you've got to let go and put that baggage down. And if you can get into that headspace of thinking, if today were my last day, and I look back on my life, was it a success or was it not? And if it wasn't, what are the reasons and what are the things why I think it wasn't? Now, what can I do so that if I am lucky enough to be granted some more time, that when I get to the end of that time, I can look back and say that was a success? Well, between now and then, whenever that might be, what are you doing about it? Even just getting willing to ask, based on my experience, that will start to bring some of the clarity to you of what those things might be. You're going to have to be patient. They might not come right away. They didn't for me. And then even when they do, you're going to start to hear the excuses, and you're going to start to have the doubts, and you're going to start to feel the fear, and you're going to start to imagine what other people are thinking or saying, and hearing what other people are saying, because you may even have some people that are close to you that say, that's ridiculous. Although you might be surprised at the amount of people that would immediately affirm your thought of, say, you know what, you're born for that. You should go for it. But the person that you've really got to feel good about and trust is the one that looks back at you from the mirror every single day. Life's too short. It's too fleeting. We're heading into a new year. Whether you're listening to this at New Year's 2017 or not, it doesn't matter. Every time the second hand ticks, tick, 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 that's another moment you can't ever get back. You're starting a new year, a new moment, a fresh start. So what is it? Now, I've used the podcast as an example. I could tell you all sorts of other stories besides, but we're on the journey. We've got this thing fired up, and I cannot wait to see where it's going. So I hope that you'll come along. I hope that you'll take away intention mixed with action equals magic. You're going to start to experience some incredible things. So you can share with me what some of those things are so I can encourage you. You can leave a comment on this podcast episode wherever you're listening to it. You know, a review on iTunes and a comment on the YouTube feed and a comment on the SoundCloud feed or on the blog show notes on noscheduleman.com. This is episode 29. Or hop onto my email VIP list. You can find that at noscheduleman.com/email VIP. And email me. Tell me what it is that you want to do so that I can encourage you. But let's stay in touch and let's go on this journey together. And thank you so much for listening through to this podcast. I hope to hear from you. And if you are listening to this any time close to the holiday time, I wish you... Now, you know what? It doesn't even matter when you're listening to it because, like I said, a new year, a new moment, a new opportunity starts every single second. So, Happy New Year. And I wish you and everyone you care about all the best of success and health and happiness. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Thanks again for spending some time with me. Remember, no plan is all part of the plan. Choose hope, embrace change, and look for the opportunity in every challenge. I'll see you next time on the No Schedule Man podcast.
Just a little deja vu.